No, I don't.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are in Mishna Shabbos. We're beginning Perek Beis, Chapter 2, Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah 1. I dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shlomis Rabinowitz, Shlomis Rav Yaakov Eliezer. This Perek, this chapter is going to sound familiar because Friday night we say it. Mm-hmm. And now we'll have a chance to learn through it. And every Friday night now you can review it. Mm-hmm. Because we'll understand it better. All right. So this chapter is dedicated to Hadlakas Ner Shabbos, candle lighting on Shabbos. And the discussion is going to be, as the Mishnah opens, with what may we light, and with what may we not light. Discussion is going to be what are the wicks and oils and fuels that are considered usable for the purposes of this mitzvah of Shabbos candles. So the Mishnah begins, and it's going to go through a number of specific examples. Ein madlikin loy belechesh. We may not light with lechesh. Lechesh is they translate as the fibers of a cedar tree, which they explain to mean these are wool-like woody fibers found between the bark and the wood of a cedar tree. Okay, that is what lechesh is. It's the fibers of a cedar tree. Nor with uncombed flax. That is explained here in the notes. After stems of flax plant, from which linen is made, have been crushed, they are combed with a metal brush. The Mishnah refers to a wick made from flax that has not yet been combed. That is what chosen is. Nor with kalach. Kalach is an inferior type of silk. Nor with the fibers of a willow tree, an arava. The same idea. There's this wool-like, you have these wool-like woody fibers found between the bark and the wood of a willow tree. Okay, that's an arava tree. Nor with the fibers of the desert, which is explained as a long grass found in the desert. Its blades can be braided and used for wicks. So these are specific examples of things that wicks can be made of, and the Mishnah is saying you may not use them. Nor with the green that is on the water. That's translated as simos. Okay, literally green substance on the surface of the water. This refers to the dark green moss that grows on the bottom of moored boats. Okay,
algae,
right? So they call it moss. So these are materials that one may not use for wicks in the Shabbos candle. Now, again, we're talking about here, the assumption is, as we'll see from the next part of the Mishnah, we're talking about the wicks that are being used with some kind of a fuel, a liquid fuel. And the point is that the wicks have to draw the fuel to them in order for the candle to burn. And the problem is, now there's a problem. Now, these are the wicks. There's a problem with these wicks. And the problem with these wicks is that they do not produce a steady flame. Now, why don't they, would you say?
Flickering.
Flickering. But the way that the commentaries explain it, and I'm not strictly how to explain, but how to understand this, but they say that when it comes to these wicks, the fire doesn't catch into the wick itself. It kind of stays on the outside. I'm not sure what that means. It seems to me that it sounds like it burns on the outside of the wick, on the outer surface of the wick, instead of getting inside of it. And because of that, it doesn't burn well. But that's the bottom line. With these wicks, it doesn't burn well. It doesn't produce a steady flame. Now, what's the problem if it doesn't produce a steady flame? So it seems, according to some of the commentaries, that the problem with that is that if the flame doesn't burn steady, so to help it out, what are you going to do? You're going to tilt the lamp. You're going to tilt whatever oil, whatever fuel you're using. You're going to tilt it so that the fuel there's more fuel next to the wick, and that will help it burn better. Okay, it'll help it burn better. Others learn that because it flickers, doesn't burn steady, that because of that, you're not going to bother. It's going to be like uncomfortable because of that to be in the room. Mm-hmm. When you have the flickering light, you're going to leave the room. Now, the whole point, or one of the main points of having a Shabbos candles is to eat your meal by the Shabbos candle. It's not to bump into things. But the bottom line is, if you don't have comfortable light, I'm not going to want to stay around with it. Others learned that without a good light, I'm going to bump into things. And that's also one of the main purposes of Shabbos candles is to give light, to give illumination in the room on Shabbos where you cannot go lighting candles, but they should be there already in order that you can see your way around instead of bumping into things. So when you have a problem with the wick, these are the problems that, come out by using such a wick. And therefore the sages say you may not use these wicks for Shabbos candles. Now this is a discussion of the wicks. Now the Mishnah is going to go into the fuels. The loy bezephis, nor can you use what they call zephis, pitch, tar, but it's talking about in liquid form. It's molten tar. The loy b'shaiva, nor with molten wax. The loy meaning these are things that can get hard. Mm-hmm. The Mishnah is talking about when they're liquid. Now, especially when it comes to the shaiva, when it comes to wax, right? We use wax candles. Yeah. And the answer is, you're right. We do, because as many of the commentaries point out, like the Bartanura, if we're talking about a solid wax candle, there the flame is going to be good. It's going to be fine. The problem is that when it's melted wax, where you want the wick to draw the fuel, draw the wax, then it's going to be a problem if it's wax. Mm-hmm. Okay? Which again, nowadays, I'm not sure if that's such a problem, but because you have, it's paraffin, no?
Right.
Paraffin is melted wax. But
No,
again,
it's a byproduct of oil.
Not wax? I don't know.
Paraffin, it comes from, it's a byproduct of the oil they take out of the ground and make gasoline.
I see. Okay. I thought sometimes they have these kind of, instead of, they have oil candles, they have like these wax candles, but it's in a melted form. Mm-hmm. I thought they have that nowadays too. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay. But the point is that here we're talking about in liquid form. That's whether we're talking about the tar, whether we're talking about, by the tar, they don't specify that as much as they do by the wax, I guess, because practically speaking, nowadays we use wax candles. But both the case of the tar and the wax are talking about where it's in liquid form, it's in melted form. The lebeshem and kik, nor can you use cottonseed oil. Okay. If you look in the Bartanura says, this is oil that comes from Tzemer Geffen, Shekarin, cotton. That's what it says. Actually, it says koton or kutun, whatever. But they use the word cotton, where we get the word cotton from. Lebeshem and kik, not with cotton oil. Lebeshem and sreifa, nor with burned oil. Now, burned oil is we'll explain that in a second. Let's just read through the Mishnah. You cannot use the burned oil. You cannot use fat of a sheep's tail. Nor can you use chaylev, which we are typically familiar with. Chaylev is it's schmaltz, but it's the forbidden chaylev. It's a forbidden fat. Right. That's chaylev specifically is a forbidden fat. The alya, the tail fat, is not, from what I understand, not necessarily a forbidden fat. But the point is that you basically take a piece of fat, stick a wick in, and light it, and it draws from the fat to be its fuel. So the Mishnah says you cannot use these things. You cannot use them. Now, the understanding is, at least about most of them, not Beshem and Sreifa, but the understanding in the case of the tar, of the wax, of the cottonseed oil, and of the cases of using the fat, which again are solid pieces of fat. Again, these, because of the substance of the fuel, it doesn't get drawn to the wick well. The wick doesn't. Well, that's a separate discussion. It doesn't draw the wick well. The wick doesn't draw the fuel well, and because it doesn't draw the fuel well, it flickers. And again, the concern is you may come to tilt it in order to get more of the fuel closer to the wick, so that the wick draws the fuel better. And doing that is forbidden on Shabbos, because when you do that to increase the flame, that's called creating fire. That's forbidden to do on Shabbos. And that's the reason when it comes to the fats also, even though we're not talking about we're not talking about in a melted form, we're talking about in a solid form. But again, it doesn't draw the fat well. It doesn't burn well. And again, I'm only guessing this because I'm assuming this based on how the commentaries lays things out, that here too, what's the concern? The concern is that you're going to come and tilt it so that whatever is getting melted of it already, the melted part of it will draw better, will get closer to the wick, and be more of it to the wick, and it'll burn better. That's where concern you're going to do. Now, in the case of shemen sreifa, which means burnt oil, what's burnt oil? Burnt oil means we know that there is truma. We have to separate truma, give it to the kohen. And when we're talking about olive oil, right, we take olive oil and we separate the olive oil and we give from the olive oil to the kohen. If truma becomes tameh, becomes impure, now let it eat it. What do you do with it if it becomes impure? You burn it. So that's what we're talking about here. You want to light your Shabbos candles using oil of truma that's tameh. There is nothing wrong with using tameh truma oil for fuel. You're not allowed to eat it, but you can use it for fuel. So you want to go ahead, you're a kohen, you've got this oil of truma. Now again, truma, as we said, is what we separate from our crops and we give it to the kohen. Only a kohen may eat it, no one else may eat it. If it becomes tameh, it becomes ritually impure from coming to contact, let's say, with a dead body or being under the same roof as a dead body, the kohen may not eat it. But he could use it for fuel. So he wants to use this as fuel for a Shabbos candle. So Friday night he's going to light the fuel. It's going to burn into Shabbos. So why can't you use it? What's wrong with it? It's olive oil. It's a perfectly good oil. But the answer is that it runs into a different problem. And it runs into a problem of it's forbidden to burn kachim, something sanctified, like a sacrifice, something holy that becomes impure and has to be burned. You may not burn it on Shabbos or even Yontif. Even Yontif, when we're allowed to burn things, again, for the purposes of at least for food. Yeah. When it comes to kachim, although it's a mitzvah, maybe a mitzvah to burn these sanctified objects, you cannot do it on Yontif. So the story here is like this. The case of the Mishna is very specific. It's very specific to a case where, or it's the lesson of not using shemen sreifa is talking about. So not using shemen sreifa is talking about like this. It's talking about where. If Friday is coming, so it's like this. The case is Friday is Yontif. It's Yontif leading into Shabbos, right? Friday is Yontif, and then you have Shabbos. So you got to light Shabbos candles, on Yontif for Shabbos. So you're going to light your Shabbos candles on Yontif, 18 minutes before Shabbos begins, and that's how you always have to do it. So you want to go ahead and you want to use this shemen sreifa. You want to use this tameh truma oil in order to do that. But the problem is you're lighting it on Yontif, which means you're burning it on Yontif. And we're not permitted to burn sanctified objects on Yontif. There's a specific source for that. The same way you cannot burn a carbon you cannot burn carbon, sacrifice need to be burned. You cannot burn them on Yontif. Truma is also considered a sanctified object, and you may not burn it on Yontif. So even though you're trying to use it for fuel, you're trying to use it for your Shabbos candles, you're using it for a purpose, right? It's not that there's no purpose, it's a purpose. Nonetheless, because we cannot burn sanctified objects on Yontif, the specific prohibition of burning sanctified objects on Yontif, you cannot burn this sanctified truma on Yontif. If it wouldn't have been Yontif, it would have been a regular Friday, and I want to light my Shabbos candles from truma oil that became tameh. No problem. I'm lighting it on a weekday. I'm burning something sanctified on a weekday. That's not a problem. And then it leads into Shabbos, and I have my Shabbos candles Friday night. The problem here is that this specific case of the Mishnah is talking about where Friday is Yontif. You want to light this on Yontif for your Shabbos night candles. Being that it's true and it's sanctified, you may not light it on Friday, which is Yontif, because you may not burn sanctified objects on Yontif. Specific prohibition about burning sanctified objects on Yontif. And that's why that's the explanation of the Mishnah's case not to use shemen sreifa burnt oil. Now, the Mishnah said, the last case mentioned here was you cannot use chalev. You cannot take fat, right, this tallow. It didn't talk about it in regard to you take this tallow and you cannot use it as a candle for Friday night, for Shabbos candles. Nacham Hamadi says, madlikin b'chalev mevushal. If you melt that chalev, you turn it into liquid form. Nacham Hamadi says, Nacham of Madi said, he said that you could use it. Once it's boiled, it becomes a liquid, and it produces a steady flame. And therefore, he says you can use it. Tanakama disagreed. The Chachamim say, whether it's cooked or not, you may not use it for the purposes of your Shabbos candles. Okay, so even if now it's a liquid, even if it's in liquid form, nonetheless you may not use it. Now, why not? So the explanation that's given is that the Chachamim agree that boiled liquid chaylev produces a steady flame. The concern, however, is that people might think that if liquid chaylev is permitted, so too solid chaylev. And to prevent that mistake, the Chachamim say no chaylev at all. So again, in essence, if the chaylev, this animal fat, has been melted, it's been cooked and turned into liquid form, you should be able to use it. It's going to produce a steady flame. The problem is, the Chachamim were concerned if you can use the liquid fat, you may come to use the solid fat, which you cannot use. And therefore, they decreed you may not use that melted fat.
What would you call
Now, one second. Now, the thing is that the way the Mishna is laid out, that you first had what's called the Tanakama, the first opinion of the Mishnah, that said, V'loi b'chaylev, no fat. Nachem of Madai said, you could use it if it's cooked and boiled and melted. And then the Chachamim say, either way, you can't use it. So the Chachamim seemingly are just repeating the Tanakama. Tanakama said no fat. He didn't differentiate. And the Chachamim also don't differentiate. So they seem to be just repeating each other. And that's not common. That the Mishnah doesn't usually do that. If the Mishnah has a Tanakama as a first opinion, an anonymous opinion, which typically means that's what we follow. You have an anonymous opinion. And then you have, again, a repetition of that opinion in the name of the sages. That's repetitive. What do you need it for? And therefore, the Gemara is always going to tell us there's some difference between the first opinion, the Tanakama's opinion, and the Chachamim. And the difference is like this. What if you take that boiled fat and you add kosher oil to it? Kosher meaning in the sense of oil that you can use for burning. Okay? So not only do you have the melted fat that, practically speaking, is okay, practically speaking, now you added regular good oil, olive oil that you can use. So you've got a mixture of both, right? So you've got, so not only is there a question of decreeing that I can't use liquid fat because I don't want to get confused with regular fat, I'd even add regular oil to it, which should make less of a chance of mixing it up with solid fat. So that's the difference. One of them says no chaylev whatsoever, no fat whatsoever. Even if you go ahead and you mix the oil, mix oil that's usable in it. And the other one says no. Here we're talking about only fat. Even if it's melted, you can't use it. But once you go ahead and mix other oils, other usable oils, other qualified oils for Shabbos candles, then there's no more problem anymore. The Gemara says which one holds which, not clear. Whenever it comes out, which of the opinions holds which. But that's the difference between the two. And at the end of the day, the halacha is like the Chachamim, where we say, whether it's cooked, whether it's not cooked, you cannot use it for Shabbos candles. Have a wonderful day.
Solid fat, would they take that? Are they taking